he called Zhang a bastard and told him that he knew he had lied to him. With a serious look, he gave the order to his subordinates to catch the girl. Zhang simply stared at him and remained silent. Upon seeing the man with blue hair, the girl's expression changed drastically. She began to look at him, panicking and feeling terrified at the same time. She explained to Zhang that he had already taken everything the Luo family owned. After saying this, she asked the man why he wanted to kill her so badly. He calmly looked at her and asked if he really needed a reason. Upon hearing that she belonged to the Luo family, Zhang turned his head toward her and stared at her intently with a serious expression. Zhang and the girl were on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, while the man with blue hair and his subordinates were on the first floor. She clenched her fist, extended one hand to the side, and stared at the man. She told him that if he killed her, the Luo family would never forgive him and would never let him live in peace. Zhang, standing behind her, dropped his arms to his sides and continued to watch the man silently. Hearing this, the man with blue hair burst into laughter. He asked her if she truly believed that a family like the Luo family was capable of such a thing. At that moment, his subordinates began to smile at the girl. With one hand on his waist, he lowered his head, placed the other hand over his face, and laughed at the thought that a second-rate family with a little money took themselves so seriously. He revealed to the girl that without the protection of the Zhao family and their ancestors 100 years ago, the Luo family would have been annihilated long ago. Upon hearing this, one of his subordinates unsheathed his sword, and the others began to laugh. Zhang Tai crossed his arms, stared at Zhang intently, and couldn't help but smile. After saying this, the man with blue hair removed his hand from his face, lifted his head, and with a serious look told her that in the eyes of the Z family, they were no different from humble peasants. He added that for him, they were just cattle that the Z family could slaughter. Hearing this, Zhang turned his head toward him and stared at him with a look filled with hatred. He couldn't help but become enraged, unable to believe that someone could be so arrogant. The man extended his hand forward, and his palm began to emit a powerful red energy that rose toward the sky. He looked at the girl and, with a smile, asked her what the Z family could investigate if there was nothing to find. Several seconds later, the energy he had released began to create a powerful barrier around the abandoned warehouse. This ability was called the Dragon Prison Formation of the Z family. The girl looked up at the sky, placed a hand on her chest, clenched her fist, and couldn't help but feel astonished and panicked. She now had no idea how she was going to escape. Zhang lifted his head and, upon seeing the barrier, couldn't help but be amazed. To him, the man with blue hair was someone very interesting. While Zhang and the girl were standing on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, Zhang Tai unsheathed his sword, stared at the girl, and prepared to attack. He ordered the others to listen carefully to the young master and leave no one alive. The others responded with an understood. The man with blue hair, standing next to Zhang Tai, remained silent. Several seconds later, Zhang Tai prepared to attack, but at that moment, the man with blue hair stepped in front of him and raised his hand to stop him. He then stared at Zhang and, with a smile, told him that the girl from the Luo family must die today. He remained interested in Zhang, fully aware that he possessed the divine rank creation class. While still looking at Zhang, he explained to Zhang Tai that the creation class called Spiritual Master was a very rare profession. Unlike others, he knew what it was. He then reached out his hand to the side and, with a smile, decided to give Zhang the opportunity to obtain everything under the sky today. He extended his hand toward Zhang and ordered him to capture the girl in exchange for sparing his life, so he could serve the Zhao family. After saying this, he asked Zhang what he thought. Hearing this, the girl, who had her hands on her waist, couldn't help but be shocked. Zhang, on the other hand, dropped his arms to his sides and remained silent for several seconds. He then looked down at the ground, smiled, and praised him, saying that the bastards of the Z family were really good at making suggestions. The girl turned her head toward him and panicked, wondering if Zhang was really going to accept his proposal. With a murderous look, Zhang stared at the man with blue hair and rejected his offer, mocking him by telling him that the Zhao family could go to hell. After saying this, he clenched his fists tightly, and while his body released the poisonous mist of Little Nine, he told him with a serious look that he refused. He also asked him if he could come for him if he was looking for a fight. The girl turned her body toward Zhang, brought her hands close to her chest, and upon seeing his body surrounded by the poisonous mist, couldn't help but take a few steps back in terror. She began to wonder what was happening. Hearing that Zhang had rejected his proposal, the man with blue hair became enraged, as this was a dishonor to him. He ordered his subordinates to finish him off. Upon hearing the order, they unsheathed their swords, gained momentum, took a big leap, and began advancing quickly toward Zhang. While in midair, Zhang Tai warned the others to be careful, as Zhang wasn't an easy opponent. Little by little, they got closer, but Zhang simply observed them silently without making any movement. Several seconds later, they approached the second floor. Zhang Tai, upon seeing that Zhang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, revealed to the others that he could use poison and advised them not to attack directly. Seeing that they were ready to attack, the girl hid behind Zhang. At that moment, Zhang deactivated the poisonous mist, extended his hand toward them, and while his body was surrounded by a green energy, he stared at Zhang Tai with a serious look. He revealed that not only could he use poison, but also the talent ability of his. Seeing this, the girl took several steps back, placed her hand on her chest, turned her head toward Zhang, and couldn't help but feel confused, as she didn't know what this power was. In the blink of an eye, several green spiritual roots began to emerge from the ground. Zhang Tai approached Zhang, grabbed his sword with both hands, and prepared to attack. But at that moment, he looked down at the ground and, upon seeing the spiritual roots, was shocked. He couldn't help but wonder what this ability was. The spiritual roots grew enormous and, in an instant, entangled around Zhang Tai and the others, rendering them immobile. They panicked, as they didn't know what was happening. Zhang, who had his hand extended toward them, revealed that his ability was the evolution of all things. Little by little, the spiritual roots began to tighten around Zhang Tai's body. He quickly grabbed the roots with his hands and stared at Zhang, unable to help but wonder what was happening. Seeing how strong the roots were, he realized that Zhang's class was of divine rank. He was also confused because he remembered that Zhang could use poison as well. Zhang Tai decided not to stand idly by. He unsheathed his sword, held it with both hands, and used all his strength to cut the roots around his body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the others began doing the same. He advised them to attack the roots since they were very fragile. The spiritual roots began to fall to the ground near the man with blue hair, who started pushing them away using his hands. It didn't take long for him to realize what was happening. With a surprised look, he shouted and called Zhang Tai an idiot, explaining that this was just a distraction. He added that Zhang was ready to attack. Zhang took advantage of Zhang Tai and the others being distracted to release the insects, which began to look at them with a penetrating gaze. While his body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he reached out his hand to the side, stared at them intently, and explained that it was already too late. The girl sat on the floor, resting her hand on it, and lifted her head. Upon seeing the insects, she was surprised. While Zhang Tai's subordinates were busy cutting the roots, the insects began to approach them. Zhang Tai turned his head to one side and, upon seeing the insects, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but sweat and feel shocked, wondering what these things were. The insects began to move at high speed and started attacking them. Zhang Tai blocked the attack using his sword, but unfortunately for him, the insects were so strong that, in a matter of seconds, they destroyed his sword. Upon seeing this, he was in shock, unable to believe that Zhang had actually destroyed his weapon. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't poisonous mist at all but rather summoned monsters. At that moment, an insect began to approach him from behind and prepared to attack. He lifted his head and, upon seeing this, was surprised. He started screaming and revealed to the others that this poisonous mist actually came from the monsters. He concluded that he couldn't dodge the attack. Zhang, who had his hand extended toward him and was controlling the insect, began to look at him with a murderous gaze and couldn't help but smile, as he had finally caught him. Just before the insect could attack Zhang Tai, someone approached him, put their foot on his shoulder, called him trash, and told him to get lost. Zhang Tai turned his head to the side and, upon seeing this, became somewhat confused. Zhang also became somewhat confused and amazed at the same time. This person was none other than the man with blue hair. He unsheathed his sword, grabbed it with one hand, gained momentum, took a big leap, and as he slowly advanced toward Zhang, he used the first form of King's 9 forms. By doing this, his body began to emit an orange aura. While John's body was surrounded by little Nine's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. The girl, who was sitting on the ground next to him, put her hand in front of her mouth and became terrified. John lifted his head toward the man with blue hair and, upon seeing that he was faster than the poisonous mist, couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and sweat. The man with blue hair used the secret technique of the Zeo family called chasing dragons. At that moment, a dragon made of spiritual energy manifested itself and began to stare at John. It clenched its teeth tightly and attacked him. The attack was so powerful that it destroyed the area where John was into pieces and created a smokescreen in the process. While holding the sword with one hand and extending it toward John, the man with blue hair stared at him fixedly and, with a smile, called him a bastard. He knew it was going to be difficult to deal with John, but luckily, his level wasn't very high, and his speed wasn't fast enough. He thought that by using this blade alone, he would be able to defeat him. But to his surprise, several seconds later, once the smoke cleared, his expression changed drastically. He was in shock, as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Luckily, John was still alive, thanks to the girl using her hidden profession ability called Earth Eternal Shield. She created a shield around them, but as she extended her hands toward the shield, it began to crack. She closed her eyes, and while blood came out of her mouth, she explained to John that she was in a lot of pain. John, who was standing behind her, began to look at her with a surprised and dumbfounded expression. He realized that she was actually a defensive type. The man with blue hair had forgotten about her, but now, seeing that she had blocked his attack using the shield, he couldn't help but become enraged. He started looking at her aggressively, clenched his teeth tightly, and prepared to attack again. John began to look at him and thought that this was a good opportunity to attack. He extended his hand to one side, releasing the poisonous mist. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground. At that moment, several insects began to approach the man with blue hair quickly from behind. One of his subordinates, who was lying on the ground, reached out toward him and caught his attention to warn him to be careful. While holding the sword with one hand, the man with blue hair turned his head back and, upon seeing the insects approaching quickly, became alert. At that moment, he grabbed one of his subordinates by the hood. The subordinate became somewhat confused, as he didn't know what was happening. While holding the sword with one hand, the man with blue hair used his subordinate as a shield. Since the insects were not very smart, they attacked the subordinate instead of him. The insects' attack was so powerful that their bodies were thrown backward. The subordinate was seriously injured, and as his body lay beside him, the man with blue hair placed a knee on the ground, leaned the sword against the ground, rested his arm on the other knee, and began to look down at the ground, coughing. John came down from the second floor and started approaching him. He couldn't help but think that the man with blue hair was a nasty bastard for using one of his own men to block the attack. The insect's attack had pierced the man's chest, and even though he was badly injured and bleeding from his mouth, he was still alive. He began to cough and caught his master's attention. The man with blue hair stood up and started approaching John. He slightly turned his head toward his subordinate and thanked him for enduring the attack for him. He thought that he had not educated him in vain and, upon seeing that he was still alive, couldn't help but praise him and think that he was truly strong. John, who was standing in front of him, simply remained silent. The man with blue hair took out a dragon yuan pill from his pocket, opened his mouth, and ate it. He couldn't believe that he was being forced to use the dragon yuan pill. In a matter of seconds, his subordinate lost his life. He began to approach John, dragging the sword on the ground, causing small rocks to slowly float. Upon seeing this, John assumed an offensive stance. On the other side, the girl, sitting next to him and covering the wound on her arm with her hand, remained still. The man with blue hair tightly gripped the sword, pointing it toward John, and with a murderous look, he warned that his next attack would slice John's head into pieces. John simply remained calm, looking at the man in silence, ready to face any attack. As the effects of the dragon yuan pill took hold, the elemental energy dragon behind him grew immense, its eyes glowing intensely as it signaled its readiness to attack. He assumed an offensive stance, stomping forcefully on the ground, shattering it into pieces. Gripping his sword tightly, he fixed his fierce gaze on John, determined to end him once and for all. His energy surged so powerfully that the surrounding rocks began to levitate. John, staring at the dragon, felt a wave of terror. He was uncertain whether he could withstand such an attack. Meanwhile, the blue-haired warrior unsheathed his sword, preparing to strike. This time, he resolved to use the second technique of the 9 conquering styles. Channeling his strength, he unleashed the descending dragon's cut, sending a devastating slash toward Zhang. Instantly, his body radiated powerful energy, and the elemental dragon surged forward at lightning speed, its maw widening to consume Zhang. At that moment, a young woman stepped in front of Zhang, extending her hands with a determined expression. She summoned the Earth Eternal Shield once more. Zhang, shielding his face with his elbow, turned to her in astonishment. Despite her injuries, she was willing to take another devastating blow. A green shield manifested around them just as the spiritual dragon struck, shattering part of the ground and engulfing the battlefield in dust and debris. As she struggled to maintain the shield, her hands trembled, and she clenched her teeth. She explained to Zhang that the warrior had consumed the Z family's secret dragon Yuan pill, exponentially amplifying the dragon's power. Her shield, already weakened, would not hold for long. They were moments away from doom. The cracks in the shield widened, and realizing the imminent collapse, she mustered her last ounce of strength to prolong their survival. Zhang grasped his cloak and observed the spiritual dragon in awe. The blue-haired warrior was far stronger than he had anticipated. Every strike from the dragon carried lethal force. The previous attack had already been overwhelming, he hadn't expected another at this magnitude. The blue-haired warrior leaped toward them, smirking as he saw the shield breaking apart. He unleashed multiple descending dragon cuts, launching a series of ferocious slashes at the shield. Zhang narrowed his eyes, raising his hand toward the sky. In response, he activated the swarm of insects mark. Deciding to show no mercy, he prepared his next move. As the girl's shield finally shattered, thousands of insects emerged from Zhang's palm, swarming into the air. The blue-haired warrior looked up, eyes widening in shock at the sheer number of insects. Clenching his teeth, he tried to comprehend what was happening. As the insects multiplied, Zhang locked eyes with his opponent. "Prepare yourself," he warned. The wounded girl, seated on the ground, pressed a hand to her injured shoulder. She stared at Zhang in disbelief, questioning whether he truly belonged to the legendary creation class. The insects encircled Zhang, their sights set on the blue-haired warrior. Zhang stepped forward and commanded the swarm to attack. Realizing the impending danger, the warrior clenched his jaw in panic. He knew that if the insects struck all at once, he stood no chance. As the swarm charged, he drew his sword and took a defensive stance. With a serious expression, he steeled himself and once again invoked the descending dragon cut. His blade crackled with energy, slicing through the incoming insects. But Zhang had another trick up his sleeve. As the insects were severed, their bodies began regenerating instantly. The warrior's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, watching the insects recover and advance again. Desperately, he continued to cut them down, but they would not stay dead. Zhang smirked, releasing a poisonous mist from his body. Extending his hand, he coldly asked, "Do you still think you can win?" The blue-haired warrior hesitated, his confidence wavering. More insects swarmed around him, and the girl behind Zhang watched in stunned silence, awestruck by his power. Enraged by Zhang's taunts, the blue-haired warrior swung his sword furiously, once again summoning the descending dragon cut. He cleaved an insect in half, but the spiritual dragon manifested once more. Opening its massive jaws, the dragon began devouring the insects, preventing them from regenerating. It was a strategic counterattack. However, amidst the chaos, an unnoticed insect struck from behind, sinking its fangs into the warrior's arm. A sharp pain shot through him as poison coursed into his veins, forcing him to drop his sword. He spun around, eyes blazing with desperation. "This isn't good," he thought, realizing that with his sword hand poisoned, he was now vulnerable. With no other option, he reached into his garments and pulled out a glowing red object. The insects, sensing an opportunity, rushed toward him. But before they could strike, he raised the object high and activated the Jade Protection of Life. Instantly, a brilliant red energy enveloped his body, forming an impenetrable shield. He sneered at Zhang. "Did you truly think you could kill the great Xiao Yuanwu with a mere swarm of insects?" Zhang simply remained silent while the insects continued to attack the shield. Yuanwu began to approach them. Upon seeing that he was able to control the insects and bring him to the point of using the ancestral treasure, he couldn't help but praise him for being amazing. He also added that even if Zhang used all his cards up his sleeve, he wouldn't be able to harm him. Seeing the man approaching, the girl stood up and grabbed Zhang by his clothes. Within seconds, he started bleeding from his mouth and approached Zhang with a smile. He decided to make him an offer one last time. As long as Zhang was willing to follow and obey him, he could allow him to join the Zhao family and grant him the Z surname, something many dreamed of achieving. After saying this, he asked Zhang to think it over carefully and not miss out on this opportunity. Zhang began to look at him with a calm gaze and remained silent. Thinking for several seconds, he started to stare fixedly at Yuanwu and couldn't help but get angry when he saw that he had become accustomed to being conceited to the point where he couldn't even see the situation he was in. Upon hearing this, the girl turned her head towards him, and with a confused look, began to wonder what Zhang was up to. He approached Zhang, extended his hand to the side, and with a smile, asked him to stop bragging. It didn't matter to him if Zhang accepted or not, because even if he couldn't kill him today, he could do it any other day. With the influence of the Zhao family throughout the country, he wouldn't be able to hide or confront them. Zhang began to stare at Yuanwu intently, and with a smile, he reminded him of his own words that one couldn't investigate if there was nothing to find. After saying this, he asked him what could happen if he died without leaving any trace. At that moment, a giant tentacle struck the ground. Upon hearing this sound, Yuanwu slightly turned his head back, and with a gaze filled with terror, he started wondering what was happening. This tentacle belonged to the insect mother. She emerged from the swarm of insects and appeared behind them. Upon seeing how enormous she was, the girl fell to the ground. Yuanwu looked up, and upon seeing how huge and terrifying she was, he started sweating. At that moment, Zhang gave her the order to devour him. Upon hearing his command, Little Nine began to approach Yuanwu and thank Zhang, as she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, Yuanwu's expression changed drastically. He started feeling a fear that he had never felt before in his life. Little Nine began to smile and, using her tentacle, attacked Yuanwu's shield. Due to her enormous strength, his body was sent flying and crashed into the wall, breaking it into pieces. He started screaming in agony, unable to believe that a monster like Little Nine actually existed. He asked Zhang what kind of monster she was. With a calm look, Zhang explained to him that Little Nine had just finished reproducing herself, so he and the jade were exactly what she needed to satisfy her hunger. Little Nine began to repeatedly hit Yuanwu using her tentacle, creating a large curtain of smoke in the process. In a matter of seconds, the shield started breaking into pieces. He opened his mouth and started screaming in pain, questioning why the shield had broken so easily. He began to bleed from his mouth and fell to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was happening. Now the fate of the Z family and the jade were going to disappear. Now that the shield had been broken, Little Nine started to stare at him intently. She began to bring her tentacle closer to him and decided to deliver the final blow. With a cold expression, Zhang remained silently observing this. Little Nine attacked Yuanwu, destroying the ground into pieces in the process. Her attack had been so powerful that all that was left of Yuanwu was a pool of blood. She began to lift the tentacle from the ground, and Zhang thought that no one should find out about this. Since Yuanwu was now dead, he started walking, reached his hand towards the sky, activated the swarm mark, and gave Little Nine the order to transform. Several seconds later, Little Nine transformed, returned to human form, and hugged him. Then she closed her eyes and, with a smile, explained that Yuanwu was delicious. She thanked him and also added that she was the one who loved him the most. The girl who was sitting on the floor turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Little Nine, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and scared. Zhang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and decided to take a look at the Z family. At that moment, he turned his head towards her and decided to take care of her. The girl who was sitting on the floor panicked and couldn't help but sweat. She remembered that she now knew his secret, and thinking about this, she couldn't help but wonder if he was going to kill her to keep her silent. This is the. Zhang began to stare at the girl with a serious look and started wondering what he should do with her. At that moment, his body started emitting a poisonous mist, and several insects appeared behind him, staring at the girl, ready to attack. He approached her, looked at the ground, and asked her to give him a good reason not to kill her. Upon seeing this, she panicked, quickly knelt before him, took out some gold coins, bowed her head, and explained that this was all the money she had on her, worth millions, practically her life. She was willing to give it to him in exchange for sparing her life. Zhang picked up a gold coin, looked at the girl, and thought that she had some sincerity. But since she knew too much and also lied, he decided it was best to eliminate her. She stood up, closed her eyes, raised one hand towards the sky, and swore by her name, Leo Sando, that if she lied to him, the heavens could punish her with 5 thunders. Zhang was somewhat confused, as he didn't know whether to believe her name was Leo Sando, since she always told lies without thinking about the consequences. Luo Sando approached him, handed him her identification card, and looked at him with a sincere gaze. She explained that what she was saying was true. She didn't know what her parents were thinking when they gave her this name, but she really wasn't deceiving him. She added that if he still didn't believe her, he could look at her identification card. Zhang took her identification card, brought it closer, and upon looking more closely, he saw a chubby girl. He asked Luo Sando if she was sure she was the same person as in the photo. She grabbed strands of her hair, pretended to have 2 ponytails, closed her eyes, puffed up her cheeks, and explained that the photo had been taken 2 years ago when she hadn't grown yet and hadn't lost weight. Seeing the expression on her face, Zhang turned his head back and started laughing out loud. The insects flying behind him became somewhat confused. Then, he turned his head towards her and, with an intense gaze, explained that he still couldn't trust her and didn't know if she would be able to keep the secret, since after all, this was something only the dead could do. Just before he could finish his sentence, she jumped, used the storage ring, causing a portal to appear. With one hand in the portal, she took out a scroll with the other and started approaching Zhang with a serious look. She asked him not to worry about this. Zhang began to look at the scroll with a surprised expression and asked her what it was. She opened the scroll using both hands and explained that this was a sealing scroll. Once she revealed the secret, she would be executed immediately. She was very afraid of dying, and for this reason, she had taken out the scroll. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform Zhang that she swore to protect his secret with her own life. If she revealed this secret, she would be executed. Upon seeing this, he was somewhat surprised, as he couldn't believe something like this existed in the world. Several seconds later, he picked up the scroll, closed one eye, started looking at it with the other, and decided to accept. Now that she had signed the confidentiality agreement, he decided not to kill her, for now. Upon hearing this, she thanked him. He turned his head towards her and asked how much the scroll cost. She put her finger on her cheek, started looking at him, and revealed that its approximate value was around 10 million. Zhang tightly gripped the scroll, began to approach her, and with a furious look, thought that this meant she had just used the only valuable thing she had in the storage ring. She thought she was going to die, so she started shaking her hands and told him that if he accompanied her home, her parents would treat him well and give him even more rewards. Zhang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and explained that tomorrow morning he had to go to the night watch, so he couldn't waste any more time. After saying this, he wished her good luck. She stood up and, while watching him slowly move away, caught his attention and asked him to take her home, since her house was much closer than the night watch headquarters. There was a teleportation station near her house, and she assured him that he would arrive on time. Although at first he refused, he later decided to listen to her. Several hours later, they arrived at the Luo family mansion. This mansion was beautiful and very large, almost like a castle. At the same time, inside the mansion, there were a lot of hooded men prostrated before a woman who was sitting on her throne. A man approached her and informed her about what had happened to her daughter. Upon hearing this, she was shocked, as she didn't know how this could be possible. The Zio family not only stole and killed but were also going too far with this lie. Seeing that she was furious, the man asked her to calm her anger towards him, as he was a wretched person who had caused her suffering. Several minutes later, Luo Sando entered the room, approached her mother, sat beside her, rested her head on her knees, and started crying. Her mother placed her hand on her head and then began to look at her subordinates with a furious gaze. She decided definitively to do something against the Zio family. Her husband approached her, looked at her intently, extended his hands to the sides, and in a serious voice asked her to calm down, since the most important thing was that Luo Sando had returned safe and sound. He also added that the Zio family was a powerful family in the country, and they couldn't mess with them, being simple merchants. Jiang stayed silently observing and thought that her real name was Luo Sando. Her father turned his body towards Jiang, handed him a black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile thanked him for saving their daughter. He also asked him not to get rid of this black card. The mother turned her head towards him, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile told him that he was their benefactor. She had prepared a meal for him so that he could eat peacefully and then leave using their teleportation, which was very fast. Jiang took the black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile told them that he wasn't going to eat. But at that moment, his stomach started growling. He turned red, put his hand behind his head, and with a smile decided to eat a little. Upon seeing this, her father pointed out the place where the food was and decided to organize it immediately. While on the other side, her mother put her hand near her face, closed her eyes, and began to smile. The best chefs in the Luo family prepared the food in several minutes. Jiang ate several dishes until he stacked them one on top of another to form a column. One of the waiters who was bringing another dish approached him and, upon seeing this, became somewhat confused and surprised. At the same time, while Jiang had one hand resting on the table and with the other was holding a piece of meat thigh, he thought that as the number of insects increased, his appetite also became greater. Beside him, Luo Sando was sitting. She turned her head towards him and with a smile asked him not to rush and eat slowly. Next to her were seated her mother and father, who simply closed their eyes and with a joyful smile silently watched Jiang. Jiang started eating even more. She began to look at him and couldn't help but blush and be somewhat surprised. Her mother, who was enjoying a cup of tea, explained to her father that their daughter said Jiang belonged to the creation class and had divine rank. For her, he was very strange because she didn't know how he had been able to save their daughter from the hands of the Zio family. Her father put his hand under his chin, started looking at Jiang, and explained to her that although their daughter didn't want to say it, he was sure that Jiang had hidden abilities and wasn't as useless as he seemed. He also added that he was handsome. Both began to look into each other's eyes and with a smile thought that if he could help them fight against the Zio family and protect their daughter for her entire life, then he could be the perfect person. Her mother approached Jiang and with a pleasant smile asked him if he had a girlfriend. She also added that in their family, Sando also didn't have a boyfriend. Her hidden profession was also quite good. Besides being an expert in business, she could also be a financial manager. Her father stood behind him, gave him a thumbs up, and explained that Sando's body was also very sexy because she had measurements of 36-24-36. He also added that they made a perfect couple, and he had even thought of names for their future children. Jiang, who was drinking a glass of water, left it on the table, spit out the water, and was shocked upon hearing her parents' proposal. She began to blush like a tomato and wonder what was happening. Without thinking for a second, Jiang ran out and thanked them for their hospitality. He left with the excuse that he was full and still had something urgent to do. Seeing this, her father asked him to wait a little longer, as they wanted to talk to him. Sando approached her father, put her hand over his mouth, and asked him to be quiet. Her mother turned her head towards her and started looking at her with a disappointed look. She sat on the chair. Her father approached her and said that their son-in-law had left. He also added that as his wife, she should go say goodbye to him. Her mother approached them and asked her not to worry since her father had the location of the black card. Wherever he went, they would follow him. Upon hearing this, she grabbed her knees with both hands, closed her eyes, and with a scream asked them to be quiet. She began to look down and started imagining Jiang. She thought that although he was handsome and strong, he was also terrifying. And even though he was truly terrifying, there was no doubt that he was handsome and strong at the same time. In the Zio family, Zio Yenin, the head of the family, learned that his grandson, Qin Wu, had died. Upon hearing this news, he couldn't help but become furious. With an angry look on his face, he ordered his subordinates to thoroughly investigate the murder. He didn't know who had done it and believed that Zio Jino was responsible, so he ordered his other grandson to immediately send someone to investigate him. While a man was prostrated before him, another man named Zan, who had one hand in his pants pocket, began to approach his grandfather. He extended his other hand to the side and explained that Yuanwu was already over 20 years old and had only reached level 30 of the second transformation, so he was useless. After saying this, he asked him what was lamentable about the death of a useless person and told his grandfather that it wasn't worth getting so angry about it. Xiao Yenin, who was sitting in his chair with both hands resting on his knees, started looking at Zan and told him that Yuanwu was truly mediocre, nothing compared to him. Therefore, it wasn't a pity that he was dead. He also added that in the end, he was the grandson of him. Even to hit a dog, you had to look at who its owner was. He would like to know who in the country had enough courage to kill someone from the Xiao family. Upon hearing this, Zan began to smile, extended his hand forward, and his hand started emitting an evil energy. He asked his grandfather not to worry about this trivial matter since, after finishing the Tanya camp issue, it didn't matter who was guilty, he would take care of it in place of him. At the same time, Zhang went to the night watch office. He opened the door and entered where Zhang and several other people were. He turned his body to one side and was somewhat surprised to see that Zhang had arrived. He began walking towards them, putting his hand behind his head, introducing himself as Zhang Chen, the new member of the night watch. He couldn't help but wonder why there were so many people here. Zhang approached him, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, extended the other hand to the side, and with a smile told him that they had been waiting for him. Upon hearing this, Zhang was somewhat surprised. Zhang decided to introduce him to the new key members of their group. The first one was Yuio, a level 45 healer who was in the second stage. She used to be the youngest, but now he had taken away that position from her. Upon hearing this, she put her hand near her mouth, started looking at Zhang, and couldn't help but blush and think that he was very handsome. This was the first time she had worked with someone so good-looking. The second member was Duan Feng, a level 49 archer who was also in the second stage. He didn't talk much but was quite conceited. He put his hand on his hip, placed the other one near his forehead, and with a smile told him that he was delighted to meet him. The third member was Chu Buong, a level 49 warrior. Although his body was small, he was strong and a great talker. He approached Zhang, stood in front of him, closed his eyes, and with a smile explained to him that having a professional member of divine level was an achievement enough to boast about for a lifetime. The fourth member was a woman named Jane Tang, a master who was in the third stage. She was level 61 and belonged to the fire class. She was also a sub-commander. She approached them, placed her hands on Chu Buong and Zhang's heads, began to caress them, and with a pleasant smile asked them to call her Aunt Tang in the future. She assured them that they would have meat to eat every day. With a pleasant smile, Zhang introduced himself as a humble awakened from the creation class. He asked how he could deserve so much enthusiasm from them. Deep down, he knew that even if it was clear, even if it was of divine level, the spiritual master's creation class was not well regarded by people. Zhang put one hand in his pocket, extended the other to the side, and told him that there was nothing wrong with being of the divine level spiritual master creation class. He asked him not to pay attention to idiots who had no good eye and only said nonsense. They all trusted him. Jane Tang put her hands on her hips, turned her head towards him, and with a smile told him that he was special because he had chosen to be one of them, the Night Watch. From now on, this would be his home. Zhang approached him, put his arm on his shoulder, and decided to talk about the main issue. He extended his hand to one side and with a serious look explained that if he wanted to enroll in the Tanya training camp, he had to have a level higher than 20. He didn't know if Zhang was. With a calm look, Zhang revealed to him that now he was level 17. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised to see that he had changed jobs just 3 days ago and was already level 17. He grabbed Zhang by the shoulders, closed his eyes, started laughing out loud, and thought that he had not made a mistake in choosing him. He believed that Zhang truly had divine talent, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to advance 3 levels in 3 days. He decided to enroll him in the Tanya Genius Camp right away. Zhang opened his eyes, turned his head to the side, and saw everyone else staring at him with a serious expression. He put his hand in his pocket, turned his body towards Zhang, and with a serious look asked him if he had gotten into trouble with someone very dangerous in the last 3 days, as there was an unknown third-grade master investigating his whereabouts using their class. He turned his head to the side, started looking at the ground, and upon hearing that a third-grade master was investigating him, he couldn't help but wonder if it could be a member of the Zio family.
This is the
Jang
end
crossed
of
his arms and told Wok that he was leaving the rest in her hands. Upon hearing this, she responded with a simple understood. Then she raised her hands towards the sky, causing a green energy to emanate and form a barrier. She turned her head to the side and explained to everyone that she had placed a protective barrier against espionage around the headquarters so that they could all speak freely without worrying about being spied on. Jang simply stood still, began to look at her, and couldn't help but wonder what kind of power this was. In a matter of seconds, her power started expanding in all directions, causing the protective barrier to become increasingly larger. Jang approached Jang, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile asked him if there was something he was hiding, adding that they were all here to help him. The others listened attentively in silence. John lowered his head, began to touch his head with his hand, and with a sad look revealed to everyone that yesterday he had killed Zi Yuanwu from the Z family. Although he had completely eliminated the traces in the body, he wasn't sure if the Z family had other methods of investigation and tracking. Upon hearing this, everyone was shocked. Jane Tang began to look at John with a terrified expression and asked him if he had really eliminated a member of the Z family. Jai Gang reached out his hand towards him, started looking at him with a surprised expression, and asked him if he had killed Zhao Yin's grandson, the cultivator who was in the 8th stage of Gen Yishuing. The cultivator couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering how strong Jang was to have killed a member of the Z family. Jan, who was touching his head with his hand, upon seeing their expressions, thought that he had now caused problems for everyone. Jai Gang began to look at Zhang and explain to everyone that it was well known that the Zio family had committed many evil acts. The young members of the Zio family had caused many problems in recent years. He couldn't help but praise him for doing good by protecting people. He crossed his arms and with a serious look remembered that the power of the 8th transformation was undoubtedly terrifying, but according to what he knew, his last grandson was Zhao Yuanwu, the most incompetent and least favorite of him. That being said, it was possible that old Zi Yenin would not personally intervene. Jane Tang, who had one hand on her waist, extended the other towards him and started looking at him with a determined gaze. She asked him not to worry because if the Z family sent someone, they, the Night Watch, would protect him since they were not weak. Zhang began to look at Jiang with a pleasant gaze and couldn't help but smile and feel happy. He was an orphan, and even though he had had neighbors who had helped him since he was little, this was the first time he felt like having a home. Ji Gang turned his back on him, started to walk away, slightly turned his head towards him, and thought that even if Zhao Yuanwu was useless, he probably had already reached the second level of cultivation. He quickly approached Zhang, grabbed him by the shoulders, started looking into his eyes, and with a surprised look asked him how he had managed to kill someone of level 30 in the combat class, being an awakened person of level 17 in the creation class. Dong became somewhat nervous, started sweating, extended his hand towards him, and asked him not to get too excited because, actually, at that moment, someone had helped him. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him who had helped him. Zhang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile revealed that the third daughter of the Liu family who lived in Zhanggan had been the person who had helped him. He also added that she had awakened a hidden defense class. Upon hearing this, everyone started looking at Zhang with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder if he was talking about Liu Sando, the daughter of the wealthiest merchant family in Zhanggan, the Liu family. Zhang approached Zhang, grabbed him by the shoulders again, started shaking him, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile praised him because even though the Liu family was not a family of warriors, it couldn't be denied that they were rich. So if someday Zhang found himself in trouble, then the Liu family wouldn't just stand idly by. He began to look at Jai Gang and couldn't help but sweat and wonder what he was doing at that moment. Zhang's body began to emit a powerful purple energy. Several seconds later, once Zhang opened his eyes, he saw that Zhang's body was surrounded by a powerful energy. Quickly, he removed his hands from his shoulder, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be shocked as sweat was dripping from his face. He began to look at him with a surprised expression and remembered that Liu Sando had awakened the defense class, so she didn't have much attacking power, which meant that the person who had killed Yuan Wu had been Zhang. Zhang extended his hand forward, and the poison mist of Little Nine appeared in his palm. He began to stare at it, revealing to everyone that he was actually an awakened person specialized in 2 classes. he revealed to everyone that his other hidden class was poison. D, in fact, who was standing behind him, started looking at him with a surprised expression and couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what this power was. Jai Gang tried to shake Zhang's hand, asking him how many more secrets he had that he didn't know, but Zhang moved his hand aside because in the palm of his hand was the poisonous mist of Little Nine and explained that this was very poisonous, fearing that he wouldn't be able to resist it. The others stayed silent, observing this without interrupting. Just before Zhang could finish his sentence, Jai Gang approached him, shook his hand, then closed his eyes and with a smile reassured him not to worry because he knew how to defend himself well against poisons. Little M's poisonous mist gradually began to make contact with Jai Gang's hand. Jane Tang started to stare at their hands, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but wonder what this strange poison was. Several seconds later, once Jai Gang stopped shaking his hand and pulled it back, he saw that his hand had already been poisoned. Upon seeing this, he realized that this was not good. Zhang put his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and told him that this time he had gone too far. Gradually, the poisonous mist began to spread over his hand. He grabbed his wrist with the other hand, stared at Zhang aggressively, and asked him to stop talking nonsense since he hadn't even tried to defend himself against the poison from the beginning. Upon hearing this, Jane Kong, who was standing behind him, closed her eyes and started laughing. Meanwhile, on the other side, CHW Buing sat near Jai Gang's hand and began staring at it intently while wondering what this poison was. Quickly, Jai Gang turned his head back to where Zioki was and asked her to come quickly and help him get rid of the poison. Z, who had one hand extended to the side, deactivated the barrier, causing the energy to slowly disappear. She put her other hand near her mouth, closed her eyes, and while laughing, responded to him with a yes. Zhang reminded him again that he had told him that this poison was very strong. He sat on the couch, and while he had one hand resting on his knee, he extended the other where he had the poison to the side. Z approached him, closed her eyes, and with a smile, she placed both hands near his hand and using her power began to heal him. While she was healing him, he turned his head towards Zhang, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile told him that this poison was very good, adding that the more skills he had, the happier he would be. Shuing approached them, placed both hands on the arm of the sofa, started staring at Zhang, and silently observed him. Several seconds later, once Z had completely healed his hand, with a serious look, he began to look at Zhang and despite him being very talented, he advised him to forget about enrolling in the Tenu camp since it was not good to enroll after what had happened with the Zio family. Although the Tenu camp offered many valuable resources, it was most likely that the prodigy of the Z family would also participate, so they should not risk it for just a few resources. Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, put a hand on her waist, closed her eyes, and began nodding to indicate to him that Jai Gang was right. Zhang started looking at Jai Gang with a confused look and asked what he meant by resources. While he had his eyes closed, he explained to him that resources referred to the blood of fierce beasts, equipment, and other things. If one could be among the first, then they would also receive rewards such as mysterious fruits and secret realm scrolls. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but be shocked and wonder if what Ji Gang was saying was true. He began to imagine the insects and thought that those resources were much better than going out to hunt fierce beasts oneself. No one knew, perhaps the insects could reproduce again. At that moment, while his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, he began to stare at Ji Gang with a serious look and asked him to let him enroll in the camp as he was not afraid of danger. He had confidence and knew that he would be able to protect himself. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him to wait as he needed to think about it. At the same time, somewhere on the west lake belonging to the Z family, there was a temple in the middle of the lake. Someone entered the water and using their power moved it aside, creating a large crack in the ground. This person started approaching the temple. This person was Zio Gonga's son, named Zab Bihan. Upon seeing how powerful he was, the others realized that he was the strongest genius in the Z family, and his combat power had reached a new level. As drops of the water from the lake fell like rain, Bean, who held a sword with one hand, turned his head back and with a serious look asked his subordinates to stop talking nonsense and also asked if they had found what they were looking for. 3 men wearing hoods placed their hands on their abdomen, bowed their heads before him, closed their eyes, and one of them revealed to him that he had found out that the young master Yuan Wu had been pursuing a woman named Liu Sando. He also added that she had been traveling with someone named Zhang Chen. Ban slightly turned his head back and with a serious look remembered that the girl from the Leo family was not from the combat class. He asked his subordinate who this guy called Zhang Chen was. The man revealed that Zhang Chen had awakened a creation class of divine rank. The last thing they knew was that he had gone to the Night Watch headquarters. One of the men placed a hand on his chest, bowed his head before him, closed his eyes, and revealed that they had discovered that he and Leo Sando had enrolled in the camp. He also added that, however, these two people were only suspects, and there was still no concrete evidence. Upon hearing this, Bean couldn't help but smile. With a penetrating gaze, he began to look to the side and thought that they were indeed suspects in this crime. A person who had awakened a creation class of divine rank was very interesting to him. Knowing that they had enrolled in the camp, he couldn't help but feel relieved as now he wouldn't have any need to make a special trip and search for them. After 3 days, he simply decided to kill them at the camp. At the same time, at the Night Watch headquarters, Ji Gang and John went to his office and sat on the sofa. Zhang, who had one arm resting on his knee, extended his other hand to the side, began staring intently at Zhang, and explained that even though he had already enrolled him in the Tenu camp, he was still very worried. He had already found a powerful ally among the people registered for him. This person was the little princess, Muhan, from the Mu family, who had cultivation at the 7th level of transformation and was known as the Sealing Queen. Before going to camp, Zhang had to accompany her to explore a secret realm in which he would not only be able to improve his level but also establish relationships with his companions in advance. D, who was sitting in front of him with his elbows resting on the arms of the sofa, simply remained silently listening. Ji Gang approached him, took his hand, started looking at him, and with a smile explained to him that he had heard that Muhan was not only extremely beautiful but also the same age as him. She would be arriving soon, so he asked Zhang to use his charms to win her over. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but start sweating and become somewhat confused. He forced a smile at Ji Gang and replied that he was going to give it a try. At the same time, someone began knocking on the office door, and Ji Gang gave them permission to enter. Muhan and a man opened the door and began to enter inside. She rested her elbow on one hand, supported her head on the other hand, and started looking at Zhang. She told them that Gang had asked her to accompany someone to a secret realm. The man put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and started smiling. She asked Ji Gang if he had changed his mind. Ji Gang told her that it was an honor for them to meet her in person. Muhan crossed her arms and began to look at the ground, feeling somewhat confused. The man started touching his head and smiling. Seeing this, Zhang couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Both stood up. Ji Gang rested his arm on Zhang's shoulder, put the other one on his waist, started looking at her, and explained that he hadn't answered them yesterday because he was angry with her grandfather, but today he was willing to accept this, but with a special condition. That condition was that she had to take Zhang Chen with her. Upon hearing this, Zhang's expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and start wondering what was happening. Muhan placed her hand on her hip and as she walked towards them, she told him that she had already given him the level 30 secret realm scroll. After saying this, she asked if he still wanted to impose more conditions. Gang, who had his hand resting on Zhang's shoulder, told her that everyone had their own conditions. Upon hearing this, she thought that he was looking for someone reliable to level up with since Zhang couldn't enter a secret realm lower than level 50. She came to the conclusion that they were looking for her for this reason. The man put his arms behind his back and with a smile began to walk towards them in silence. She approached Zhang, started looking into his eyes, and asked him what level he was in and what class he had awakened. He began to look at her and with a calm voice explained that he was level 17 and had awakened the creation class. Upon hearing this, she placed a hand on her waist, started pointing at Zhang with the other hand, looked at him disdainfully, and upon seeing that he was a level 17 novice of the creation class, she called him trash. Zhang couldn't help but get angry and think that she was a spoiled brat. Ji Gang exploded with rage, clenched his fist tightly, and with a hateful look prepared to teach her a good lesson. He called her an empty-headed brat and asked her to show more respect since Zhang had awakened a hidden divine rank. Seeing this, the other man grabbed him by the hip, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile asked him to calm down, explaining that Muhan's boyfriend had just left her, and that's why she was behaving this way. She turned her head back, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but start to feel scared. She thought that this time she had gone too far. Zhang turned his head towards Ji Gang, and upon seeing his attitude, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and confused at the same time. She became nervous, turned her body towards him, closed her eyes, extended her hands towards him, apologized to him, and asked him to calm down. Zhang started touching his head with his hand and thought that this situation was strange. The secret realm they were going to was called the Village of Light. It was level 30, and the entry requirements were that only a maximum of 5 people below level 50 could enter. The conditions to complete this secret realm were to eliminate all the monsters, kill the boss, or destroy the sacrifice altar. Several hours later, they arrived at the portal. Duan FK, who had one hand on his waist, turned his head towards them and with a serious look asked everyone to listen carefully. This time, he was going to be the leader. He asked everyone to remember that if they accidentally separated or found themselves in danger, then they should immediately return to this teleportation point. Although the probability of this secret realm becoming unstable was low, caution had to be taken in case of any eventuality. Everyone had to return here immediately and leave the secret realm. Muhan, who had her arms crossed, began looking at him with a smile as she silently listened. CHW Buing approached Zhang, reached out his hand towards the portal, closed his eyes, and with a smile told him that a level 30 secret realm scroll cost at least 1 billion. Z, who was holding onto her elbow with her other hand, also stayed silent, listening. Muhan, who had her arms crossed, turned her head back and started looking at Zhang. She called him a newbie and asked him not to start crying like a baby after entering the secret realm because it would only hold them back. Zhang simply started staring at her and remained silent. Everyone entered the portal. Shu Buing turned his head back and with a smile asked him not to worry as he would take care of protecting him. Zhang began walking towards the portal, and despite this secret realm being only level 30, he had a strange feeling. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.